Hi, this is the Evolution Lab podcast, and I'm Matt Roberts. This is part of my ongoing mission to keep developing the optimum way to help people reach their goals, overcome adversity, and change perceptions about what's possible to achieve with our bodies. The Evolution Lab is all about being the very best version of you. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and follow the podcast, and make sure you leave a rating and review. It'll help others to find the podcast to share and enjoy too. And now, let's get into the show. Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of the Evolution Lab. My guest today is someone who is a combination of an endurance athlete, an adventurer, a broadcaster, a travel writer, a media personality. Well, I could go on and on, a father, a husband, lots of things all together. He came to attention publicly on reality TV series, can't believe it's back in 2000, I think, Castaway, and since presented nature shows, including Countryside, and made numerous travel shows over the years as well. It's Ben Fogle. Ben, how are you?
I'm very well. Very good to be here.
Just to skip through what I'd like to go through with you today, it's actually, I think, look, there were probably, I think, 4 big key events that for me spring to, I know you did lots in between of lots of other small events too, but the big one spring to mind. You first did in 2004, Marathon de Sables. Marathon de Sables was the big first thing that you did. 2005, it was the Atlantic rowing race with James Cracknell. We're going to definitely dive deep into that one. There's a load of stories there, I'm sure you can tell, and things to go through. And then Royal Force 2009, a race to the South Pole. And then in 2018, a 6-week summit of Everest. So those are the 4 biggies. I think I'd like to try and really get deep into those, understand what it is that you went through to get to the point of completing those the events, and really get to the nitty-gritty of the highs and the lows of that, but get people who are listening to this to understand just how much work goes into that, because it's never quite understood how much time and effort and pain there is that goes into doing a long endurance event. But all that aside, sure, we'll go deep into that. I'd like to know a bit more as well, though, about really when you understood as a kid that you were sporty, or did you understand as a kid you were sporty?
Complete opposite, if I'm to be honest. As a kid, I was really unsporty. I, as a child, never believed I was very good at sport. And when you don't believe you're very good at sport, you become what you believe. And therefore, I shied away from sport. I kind of describe it almost like an allergy for me. I hated it because I didn't feel I was very good at it. And the more I did something I wasn't very good at, the worse I became. And it became this vicious circle. And what it did was I just had no confidence in any physicality. I didn't come from a family of athletes. I didn't come from a family of sporting types. My father is a vet. You could argue actually that's quite a physical task, lifting dogs all day long.
Sure.
You know, dad is in his mid-70s and in amazing physical health. He is what I hope I will be when I'm in my mid-70s. And then my mother's an actress, but neither of them were ever into sport. And therefore, I didn't grow up in a house with parents that did sport. My sisters didn't for a long time. And therefore, it wasn't something in my world. I wasn't interested in watching it. I wasn't interested in participating in it. So actually, sport was completely invisible in my childhood.
To what sort of age, though? So that was when you were at school for a certain time. Was a certain age you got to where you started to recognize that you were getting interested in it, or you started to get good at it, or what happened there?
I think it was after school. It was just after. It was when I went to university. And I joined the Royal Naval Reserves. And as part of the Royal Naval Reserves, I started doing sailing, not so physical. But as part of that, I became interested in my own physicality. And I remember doing my first half marathon. I remember going to the gym. And that was probably the first time I kind of realized that actually I was stronger than I thought. I was running a little bit faster than I thought I possibly could. So perhaps that was the first time I started thinking about my physical health. Up until then, I think we can largely divide the nation into those who are just quite lucky that we're quite physically fit, even whether we don't do exercise, and those that really need to put a lot of extra work in. And I think I was very lucky, Matt, that I was one of those people that I always looked pretty fit. You know, I didn't have a big belly. I certainly didn't have the huge pecs and the abs and the biceps, but that never bothered me. Kind of physical appearance was never something that I was into. And actually, if we look at the chronology of years, and I think I don't know your age, Matt, but I think you're younger than me. But certainly, it's only really within the last, I think, 15, 20 years that people have become really obsessed with physical appearance. Yep. But I really am and always have been more into the body as an instrument than an ornament. Doesn't, of course it's good to, have good physicality, but I've always been more interested in what I can do with my body than just that general appearance.
So if you look back to your teenage years when you were not doing sport as a regular thing you chose to do, would you say you were doing things at that point that were in any way competitive, or were you not a competitive person at that point? What was your kind of interest area?
I've never really been that competitive, if I'm to be honest. I've got this life mantra that life's there to complete, not to compete. And maybe that's one of the reasons that I wasn't so into competitive sport per se. It's always surprised me that sport for most people, and I'm using the very broad spectrum here, but when most people talk about sport, they will talk about it as a competition, one team against the other, one individual against the other. It's always about racing others, yourself, the best time. Now, I think that was one of the things that I didn't enjoy so much, that pressure that comes with it. If you just use it as something to build on, almost as a foundation, I think it becomes something very different. But, I think this notion of pushing yourself further and harder became apparent maybe in my early 20s, when I realized that actually I was quite good at endurance. I could endure for a very long time. And I think that probably started when I was marooned for a year on an island, and I realized there was a lot that came with that year on Tarrantay, which was part of a BBC project, that I learned about myself, and in particular about endurance. And I think that was the beginning of me sort of embracing some of these bigger challenges.
I think it's interesting. I think the mindset around competitive spirits, the mindset about how we construct bodies, there's really two or three camps to this. So I know that having worked with lots of people over the years, I've worked with people who need to achieve super high Olympian levels of performance. That's what they're doing. That's their sport, that's profession. But right through to day one beginners who've never done anything whatsoever. And I think gradually, as a population overall, there's definitely a shift towards on Instagram, there's a crowd who want to have the body beautiful, particularly. There's a certain shape and sculpting and showing off, and probably, frankly, morphing digitally as well. But there's much more of a trend in sensible people to try to have a body that's fit for purpose and to make sure that it can actually do lots of things. And our experiential way of living through the world now wants to go traveling, wants to go and do other things. We're becoming less of a sit on the beach type nation of people, and much more like going and using our bodies for other things that are more interesting, more exciting. The dichotomy with that, of course, is that we're also getting fatter at the same time, which is a really bizarre place to be. But there's a shift going on, which is really important and really good. And that functionality, that functional training approach, is definitely a really nice shift that's going on. With all that in mind, you had the kind of point where you weren't into doing sport and exercise. You weren't particularly into doing any long events. You're not competitive, but all of a sudden, you decide to go and do, frankly, one of the hardest running races in the world in the Marathon de Sables. Just tell me exactly how many miles that is per day.
Well, it varies, really. I mean, the overall distance is 170 miles over 6 days. And in theory, it's a marathon a day, but actually it changes each year. So if I remember correctly, the first day was about 13 miles. Then the next day was 20. And then you have a 65 miler, and then you have a 26 miler, and then you have a 20 miler, and then you have a 13 miler. They break it down into different amounts of miles each day, and it's partly to keep you confused, because as many people watching or listening to this will know, it's the unknown that is most unsettling, and it's a very good trick. If you watch SAS, Are You Tough Enough, or all of those shows, it's all about being unsettled. And as soon as there is no consistency, that's how to unsettle us. So I don't want to talk about the pandemic and COVID, but one of the reasons so many people are feeling so anxious is because there is no consistency in our lives right now.
That's
we
right.
don't know what we're doing from one day to the next. And the same goes for the MDS, the Marathon des Sables, is that they change the terrain, they change the route. The reason I chose to do that was, I think I was just at a point in my life when I kind of wanted to regain the narrative. You see, I'd just come off doing arguably Britain's first reality show. It's called Castaway. It was for a whole year on the BBC. And what happens when you've done a reality show is that you become reality show famous. And reality show fame, with apologies to any reality show contestants watching or listening to this, is very thin. There's no substance to it. You're not famous because you're a great athlete. You're not famous because you're a great artist or musician or poet. You're famous just because your face has been on telly. So I wanted to regain the narrative, and I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to test myself and overcome that inner Everest. And I have always believed in doing things. If you're going to go for it, Matt, go big or go home.
Well, you definitely did.
Well, for me, it just felt like the running race. If I was going to really test myself, let's go really big. And everyone thought I was mad. Everyone thought I was completely bonkers. But what I loved about the MDS, and I still love about the MDS, is it's so much more than just a physical race. It's a beautiful thing. You're in a beautiful part of the world. You're in the Sahara Desert. There are hundreds of other runners. It's an amazing logistical marvel just to see how this thing is organized, how it unfolds. It's the theatrical sporting event is the way I describe it. It really is like you are on the stage with a whole group of actors in this unbelievable set, and the lighting and the sound and everything has been polarized into this remote corner of the Moroccan desert. And it is just the most incredible experience. I can't even begin to describe how beautiful the whole thing was, and utterly hideous. I mean, it was the most painful experience of my life. You lose all the skin on your feet. It's unspeakably painful, to be quite honest, and miserable. But it really was theatrical and amazing and life-changing. And the reason that MDS, funny enough, has since become, I mean, it's booked up years in advance now. I'm sure many listeners will have either done it or tried to do it, and I believe there's like a 5-year waiting list. And the reason is because so many people are time poor right now, but they also want something for their short periods of holiday that we still get that will be like a life-changing experience within a week. And the MDS it just hits the sweet spot. It gives you everything you want: personal satisfaction, the ability to push yourself physically and mentally. And I came back and my confidence had totally changed. It had completely altered. I found myself a different person because I finally realized, and by the way, I didn't run it very fast at all. There are some people that run it really fast. My old mate, James Cracknell, that we'll get onto soon, he smashed that race. I mean, it's unbelievable how fast he ran that. I, on the other hand, I was practically last, but it didn't matter because I did that race for very personal reasons. And it changed my whole perspective on life, to be quite honest. And it was the springboard for many more big adventures.
So for you then, really, going back to the point about being competitive, this very much for you, the goal was not to go out there and try and be in the top, whatever. Because I think in 2004 you did this. I forget the first time it was run, but some of the guys who worked for me at that point in time, I think the first year might have been the year before or a few years before that. It was around that time it started off. It was a big buzz at that point. And one of the guys came to me just said, I'm going to do this thing, the MDS, and explained it to me. I said, you are crackers as well. It sounds like hell on earth, but yeah, good luck to you. It's great. We're going to sponsor you and it'd be great. Like you, he came back with half his feet missing and just was in pain, but had the best experience of his life and was life-changing for him as well, because it is that whole thing about overcoming all the odds. Would you say for you it's a bigger test mentally or physically?
Listen, it's a tough challenge, but you can make it as easy or hard as you want it to be. The environmental conditions are probably more testing than anything else, because it's
Yeah.
like everything, you can run a marathon. There's many people, and no disrespect to it, but there's many people that will do the London Marathon at walking pace. Now, that's not diminishing the majesty of them doing that. It's still a beautiful thing that you are completing. For many people, walking 26.2 miles is a huge, huge thing. Now, the same goes for the MDS. Technically, you can't walk it because they've got 2 camels, and you have
There are
to
time points
finish.
on it.
You have to finish ahead of the camels. And camels, anyone that knows big animals, do walk faster than we walk. So you're going to have to do a slight yomp, but you can do it pretty slowly. But funny enough, like anything, the slower you do it, the more wear and tear there is on your feet, the more
Absolutely.
dehydration you have, the more time you're out under the sun. So it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Quite frankly, the people, the 2 Moroccan brothers, and I apologize that I've forgotten their names now, that have won it almost every single year, they were doing it, about 90% faster than me. And it meant they were out there fleetingly, and, they had lounged around and eaten and drunk and had a good sleep by the time I got in. And then I had
It's
just
a
2 hours
whole
sleep, and then
different
I was off.
experience, isn't it?
So it's a very different experience. So it's mind and physicality, to be honest.
And your training block for that, 'cause normally a marathon training plan, for those that have not done one before, it's about roughly 16 weeks, 12 to 16 weeks, somewhere there. If you're more experienced to run, it might take maybe 7, 8, 10 weeks, somewhere there. What was your training block going into doing the Marathon de Sables?
This is when I get really embarrassed, and hopefully you don't see me actually going a shade of red,
You're
Matt, because
recoiling. Okay.
I'm going to tell this to the wrong person. I actually did it in 6 weeks. And the reason I did it and I went from 0, as in never having even been in a gym before. Honestly, I'd never even been in a gym. I'd done a half marathon when I was in my kind of late 20s at university, and that was it. And then I hadn't done anything for whatever it was, 10 years, 12 years.
Do you remember how long the half marathon in university took you to do? What the time was for that one?
I don't. But this is a really interesting thing that you're saying that, because funny enough, it's one of my problems with sport is that there always has to be a figure attached to it. So when you do the London Marathon, everyone does, well done. What time did you do it in? And when everyone does become obsessed. Now, I do get it, because I find myself doing that now, because it is a very good way. And because of what you do, Matt, you're using that data to build up a physical,
always metric heavy,
physical understanding of what people are capable of. So I get it now, but actually it's one of the things that I find a bit disappointing about sport and exercise, and I think it's what puts off a lot of people, is the fact that we are still obsessed. By the way, it sounds like I'm kind of rebuking you. I'm not at all, but it's an interesting.
No, but you're absolutely right.
It's one of those things. It's one of those things that that I've always been a bit frustrated by, that people are obsessed with the amount, the time that you do things in. And I think it's what put me off. And it's actually one of the reasons I've taken on these big challenges, is the amount of time it takes you is so big, it becomes abstract and means absolutely nothing.
It's part of why I asked the question about really this competitive thing, because your point's completely right. I think for most people, and rightly so, there's no need to think about the numbers. And without question, I do it out of habit, where people always ask about, if you did a triathlon, how long did it take you? Went for a long run. Was it just? It's all about the metrics the entire time, right down to now data tracking through wearables that we wear constantly. How much did you sleep, and how much deep sleep did you get? It's literally every piece is there. And I'm a data nerd for these things. I love it. It's fine. It works for my business. That's all great. But reality is, for most people, it is too intensive. It is too detailed. It is too pressurized. And the idea of trying to have to do a marathon, look, the magic number for most was always sub 4 as a marathon. People forget how fast that is. But people have normalized certain numbers to the point where those then that were never going to get to a sub 4-hour marathon feel as though they're just completely despondent doing a 4:30 or a 4:45. And the truth is, it in itself is a massive achievement. So you're absolutely right. It's good to try and just take away from those and go for the achievement is getting around the thing without going to the end part of the equation, and again, like going too slow and it's pointless. Has to be some push in there and some actual kind of drive in there, of course. But to take away from the pressure on a number gives people a chance of actually succeeding in a far better way.
I agree. And going back, when I did that half marathon, I think it was probably an average sort of half marathon time. I would have imagined it was probably late 1 hour 50, something like 1 hour 45, something like that. That's what I kind of vaguely know. So the MDS really was the first big one that it was the first big challenge that I had taken on. And I remember going to a gym, actually, not yours, and finding a fitness instructor and asking him whether he could get me ready. And he was like super keen. Yeah, of course. What are you planning in 6 weeks? And
he was
was
selling
thinking
big.
I might be doing a 10-kilometer run or something. And actually, when I told him, he said, "I think I better not train you. I think you'll find something." I think he was
just too big a challenge.
He was worried that if I died, my family might end up suing him. So I actually just did my own training. I didn't. There was no process to it. There was no science behind it. I was very, very disciplined. I got up at 4 o'clock every morning, and I just ran for a couple of hours before work. My work always starts very early, anyway. So I found myself getting up at 4, running for a few hours, working for the day, and then running at the end.
And before you went down there for the actual event itself, what was the longest run that you had done? You get the start line, Marathon de Sables. You've got day 3 coming. It's about 50 or 60 miles, somewhere there. What's the furthest you'd run in one spell at that point?
Okay, I just put a caveat next to this that I don't want all your listeners and viewers to go and do this or think that this is a good idea. I think probably the maximum was about, I don't think I had probably necessarily run more than between like 15 miles, maybe was my maximum, given there's one day in the MDS, which is 60 miles. But this also comes back to something else that I've struggled with quite a lot. And jumping ahead to when I've ended up teaming up with James Cracknell, one of our big differences was his obsession with training and preparation, and my obsession with starting one of these big endurance races in good physical mental health. And it's a sweet spot. And for James and for athletes, and I suspect for you, Matt, it's probably about, a proper training regime, fitness, diet, all those things, but making sure you are working to peak physical condition. Now, for me, what I've always thought with the MDS, this was how I hypothesized. And it wasn't entirely accurate, but it's not far off. And I've used it with lots of the challenges. You have to reach that start line in good physical condition. You have to, you need to bulk up for all of these things. It's very, very hard to bulk up and keep yourself really fit.
Absolutely.
I defy anyone to say that you can do it. You try eating 3 packets of hobnobs and then doing a big workout. I know it's the dream, but it's really
living the dream. Perfectly.
It's really hard because you're just feeling all cumbersome and lumbersome. So for me, what I always thought, and the MDS is actually a bit too short for this to really kind of come into its own. But I think you need to start, having rested, having slept as much as you can, having eaten as much as you can, being in a really good emotional, physical place. And that doesn't necessarily mean having just run a PB the day before. Now, I know, Matt, your whole thing will probably be when you're training for a marathon, you need to train down in the lead up to the race anyway, and you need to abstain from exercise for a period of time. But mine has always been that actually when you're out there running that first day in the desert, 12 miles, in all honesty, that's sort of part of your training for me. That's part of building up your stamina in those conditions, because you can never really truly replicate the conditions of one of these extreme places. Now, people train in hyperbaric chambers, and there's also, and you can train in cold chambers and hot chambers, all of these things. Nothing will really give you a true experience like being on the ground in that environment. And for me, I think it was quite helpful that when it came to that 60 miler, I'd never experienced it before, because it meant that I didn't really know what was coming, which, goes both ways. But it also meant that the adrenaline just kept me going.
Yeah, for sure.
And I wouldn't advise that for everyone. I think if you're going to do the MDS, I think that you need to, I would have put a lot more focus on foot preparation. I think there's a lot more. I would have probably just walked, to be honest, I would have taken my shoes off for 6 months leading up to the race, even living in London.
Really, really well, just to toughen up and get that skin to be super hard.
For sure. I would just be one of those mad people you occasionally see walking around the streets of London. Yeah. I think you would nail it. If you spent 6 months where no shoes on your feet, I think that would just change the whole experience. But, it's like all of these things you learn by being out there. And that's the beauty of it, that everyone approaches it in different ways.
I'm quite intrigued with the fact that, going into this, you were probably the least prepared, I've heard, for anyone doing any endurance event going into the MDS, which is interesting from the point of view of there's a whole nature nurture thing to how we exercise for certain things. Now, there's certain things which you define by just this person clearly is very good because you can see it in a technical thing. So someone is good at playing football, you can just see it. They just have that skill that's kind of pretty much in there. That's there in their DNA. What you're talking about, actually, really having not done massive preparation for what is, let's be honest, it's a really tough event. And there's no getting away from the fact that running 50, 60 miles in one day out of the 5 or 6 where you're covering 170 miles, that's not, for most people, having the Hobnob diet and then doing that is not going to work. They are going to get there. And at the end of day one, they'll have achieved their maximum and they'll be so stiff the next day, so sore the next day. Day 2 is not going to happen and day 3 is going to be completely a no-go. So I've got to think that there's something in your genetics without you really realizing it necessarily, not being apparent. Because we have this thing where, while parents might not have been obviously sporty because they haven't chosen to do sport in their life, it doesn't mean the DNA strand isn't appropriate. So there's all sorts about you that we would now be able to find out. You might know already, but wearing wearables as we do, you can find things like HRV data, heart rate variability data. This sort of thing gives you an idea of how you respond to stress situations physically. And that kind of data, if I'd known that back then about what you were doing, you could say, actually, you need to have a bit of a kick of adrenaline. You need to have this going on, and you can really tweak and make sure the preparation is right. But I think you have the ability built in your body, in your DNA, to do things which go beyond the norm. So you actually chosen to do routes which suit you. And I think it takes one big push at that. You chose your one big event to do it, to show, actually, I can really push the envelope here and really go for it like crazy. At what point, when you get to the start line and you're looking at I forget, there's like 400 or 500 people taking part in it, are you thinking, I'm doomed? Or are you thinking, I don't care what these guys are going to do, and I'm going to just kind of run my race, that's it? What's your mindset going into that? Because these guys, some of them get super prepared, super ready, and they're going to go and nail it, like Cracknell for a start. What's your mindset? Are you nervous at that point, or are you thinking this is going to be just a great experience?
Blissful ignorance at that point, Matt.
Right. Best place to be, actually.
I think when you were at that start line, there was so much excitement with just being in the Sahara Desert that actually who I was running against, who else was there, became abstract, because it does attract some elite athletes, and I certainly wasn't one of those.
Absolutely.
But for me, I think it was the drama and the theatrics of it that made it so memorable.
What did you learn about yourself that surprised you?
There's always more in you, that you can endure a lot of pain. I remember waking up in the morning and you can hardly move. I mean, my feet were stripped bare of skin. I had no skin left on my feet. It was the pain. It's like running with shards of glass in your shoes, but you just get on with it. You know what? You just almost bury that pain within, and you just soldier on because there's no alternative. It's a very different mentality to doing something like the marathon, where the temptation to stop is great. You can look at it both ways. There's crowds of people, and yes, there'll be a slight humiliation, but ultimately you could stop and hop on the number 32 bus and go home. But in the Sahara, you've got to get. There aren't cars following you straight behind. So if you give up, you're still going to have to walk the rest of it. For some people, that's no different to what they've been doing anyway. So you're kind of stuck there.
Would you do it again?
I would, and I probably will. I think I turn 50 in 2 years, and I've always thought it would be a great thing to do, just to remind myself that I've still got it. when I'm 50.
It's interesting, isn't it? We're the same age. I'm 48 as well. I sort of think with the certain points you get to, aren't there, where it's not proving to anybody else. It's actually just proving to yourself that if you look after yourself, everything from doing cryo work and cold showering to taking things like NMN, timings of when you eat, eating windows, how you train, how much the endurance element of what you're doing actually produces responses enzymatically, which give you a higher inflammation or a lower inflammation. All these things are all there, we know, to extend our life. And I think that when we get to a certain point, also when the kids are growing up as well, your kids are now teenagers, mine are. My daughter's 19, my son's 17. You have a bit more time back in your life as well. It's your time to actually do things which are reminding yourself why you can stay vital, why you stay really healthy and on it, and can, going back to a point about functionality, you do things just because on a whim you want to do them. It's not about having to go and lift X weight. It is about you want to go and do a 5K or a row down the river or whatever it might be in life. You can do that thing and get on with it at a certain point. So go forwards and almost row forwards a year, and yourself go from being in the desert to being in a boat for 49 days staring at Cracknell's backside. Or was he in front or behind? I forget which way it worked now, actually.
Do you know what? Actually, technically, we only rode one at a time, but I saw Cracknell's front side and backside. To be quite honest, there was a lot of nakedness out there. You don't wear many clothes out on the Atlantic, Matt. Yeah, it's scarred me for life.
Entirely. So this is, I'm hoping now you're going to give me the answer to this one, which is not you did a hobnob diet and you rode for an hour a day to get ready for this. Is a serious challenge. This is rowing across the Atlantic, 49 days. It is a race, isn't it? It's a race you take part in. How many boats take part in that race? That year, how many were there?
The year that we did it, there was about 25 boats or so, with some pretty serious rowers. There was a lot of
some serious
rowers.
Amped up rowers, including the person sat with you, Cracknell, who's a multi-gold medal winning rower, of course, who has a very different approach to training, having been beaten up by his coach Jürgen Grobler in his kind of full training years. So I've seen the techniques of what he was doing, and I think he did that to you as well. I think he actually pushed you through the same sort of process of being literally, you train till you're throwing up. You train to the end of beyond. My background is as a sprinter. I had a coach who was an utter sadist who just was into making sure you just inflicted pain after pain after pain. And that's something which either you like and get on with, or you just suck it up because you know you have to, or you just hate it completely and give up. So this is a different approach now. It's going to this approach of having to go for, obviously, some serious training. Again, going back to the point with the MDS, what was your timeline between deciding to do this and training for it, then getting onto the Atlantic and rowing across?
Well, basically, we had a year. Once I teamed up with James, we had about a year to get ourselves ready. And you're right, James and my approach was different from the get-go. We have very different mentalities. And James comes from the Grobler school of tuition, which interestingly has become slightly controversial right now.
That's right.
I think and it's an interesting one, isn't it, Matt? Because, we're living in a time now where I don't want to overuse this word, but wokeism is now creeping into sport. And I never really got to know Jürgen. I heard a lot about him. I feel I know him. I've met him, socially once or twice. But, James idolized him, and he got the best out of James and the rest of the squad. And I think I respect Jürgen and his technique because I respect James. Did I enjoy it? No, I hated it. No. I hated that process of James trying to push me way beyond what I thought I was capable of. Now, as it happens, he got a lot more out of me. He wasn't, funny enough, our training was, we didn't do a huge amount of training for the row together. Most of our planning and preparation for that race was about becoming ocean yacht masters, doing sea survival courses, learning how to use the equipment. There was a huge mountain to climb just to get to that start line. I did quite a lot of the training myself. I traveled around. I was filming in Namibia. I traveled for 3-4 months with a rowing machine.
Namibia, not known for its oceans.
No. I mean, my sole training was with a concept rowing machine. I had it on the roof of our vehicle. I'd set it up every morning in the middle of the desert in Namibia, and I rode for a long time. I mean, you know how boring those machines are. I actually got, funny enough, in terms of fitness, it's probably the fittest I've been, because I was probably on that machine for 4 hours every day, 2-hour sessions, and I really stuck to that.
How far did you row? Remember the numbers? Sorry, I push you on numbers again.
No.
Do you know how far you rowed? No, it was just literally you set the timer.
No, but I remember my split. I always kept under a 2-minute split.
Let's give people some context on that. Yeah, context on that is interesting, because when you look at people going to the gym normally, if you set someone up on a row machine and say, fine, row for 500 meters, for a lot of people if they're not super into it, staying around 2 minutes 10 per 500 meters that you row as your average, that's quite hard. That's quite hard to do. For the Olympic guys who get in the boat and they go for the gold, as James did, they're down in the 115s and down there. I mean, it's super intensive. So going at around 2 minutes per 500 for that long, again, that's a huge input. So I'd go back to my point before about this is not a thing which is just coming at you. This is coming, I think, from within you at the same time.
Funny enough, before I went to Africa, James was really unhappy about my physicality. We went on a boat, and I'm upper body strength is not my forte. If I show you my thighs now, I'm not going to get them out, Matt. Don't worry. This is a family show, but my thighs, my legs, and my thighs have always been ridiculously calves and thighs. I was born with like tree trunks, and a big bum, and I think that's always given me this endurance when it comes to lower body stuff. So I could walk the world in that. Like, honestly, when I think about challenges I could do, if you said, will you run the world, I'd be like, yeah, I think that would be quite easy, actually. So actually upper body and using these guns, of which you can see there's not very much there, has always been much more of a challenge for me. And James was really unhappy about my upper physicality before I went away. And I was like, right, I'm going to prove to him. So I went away for 3 months, and I came back looking like Peter Andre in his good days. Not that he's in his bad days now. Peter, if you're watching, you're a legend, mate. But I came back with pecs and biceps for the first time. So I put in a massive effort. Rowing machine, by the way, if you want some takeaway for your listeners and viewers, oh my God, a rowing machine. You can't get, if you're going to use one piece of gym equipment, I think you'll probably agree, a rowing machine is hell, but it is also, it will transform you. I've never felt fitter.
Well,
ever.
every machine has a met rate in the gym. So it's a metabolic rate. It's the amount of calories you burn per kilo of body weight per hour. And it's one of the highest ones. You're up at kind of 14, 15 calories per kilo body weight per hour. So it's a huge calorie burn. But the key thing that's good about it is you're working, of course, pretty much every single muscle in your body to go through good technique of rowing. So everything's working, every part of your arms, every part of your back. You're working in the core, you're working the legs, your strongest area. So it's very complete exercise. It's why people dislike it, is it's just hard. It's just everything's working super, super hard.
But, you know, I got myself into good physical condition. And again, we had a lot of differences of opinion about how to approach that rowing race, as to whether we should arrive at the start line in peak physical condition, or whether you go by my strategy, which would be to arrive in very good physical condition, but to use the ensuing 49 days to get ourselves to peak physical condition. Because the way I saw it is, if we started in that peak physical condition, the only way was down. Whereas I felt that if you maximized body weight building, as in, consuming enough food, having enough sleep, not killing yourself beforehand, you could actually enhance your strength by the end of the race. Now, as it happened, I don't want to jump ahead, but by the time we crossed that finish line, we were not in good physical health, far from it. I remember everyone saying to me after we finished that race, God, you must have been so fit after this. I was like, oh my gosh, I've never been in worse shape.
So going into that race, and so once you started the race, what was your weight at the start of that race?
My weight I've always kind of been around the 80 kilo mark, and I think I tried to get up to 90. I don't think I managed it. I probably started at 85. And I think I finished it at about 63 kilos, something like that.
I mean, it's such a light frame. At that point, that's a huge, huge loss of mass overall.
And as a 6 foot tall person, it's a reasonable amount.
So when you were on the boat and you're rowing across there, clearly your calorie intake is one of the key things here. You've got to make sure you're loading in with a huge amount of calories. What were you eating?
We were eating rehydrated food mainly, but each of those had a calorie count of about 2,000 calories. So we were trying to consume about 10,000 calories a day. That's what we were trying to keep up with. We weren't. We were rarely consuming much more than sort of 8,000 calories.
Was that because you get bored of the food you're eating, or you're so exhausted that you didn't feel like it? What was that? Why was that happening?
Actually, it was a mix of the amount we could take on board. We simply didn't have the space on board. The weight would have just been too much, and also your body just can't really. There's a point at which it just can't. You're just going to feel sick. So it's that fine balance.
Yeah, people do these sort of heavy loadings of calories for short periods of time when they're doing kind of short events, and it's fine because you can get away with doing 3, 4, 5 days, no problem. When you're in a boat for that period of time, you've got to keep putting it in context. If someone gets COVID now and they isolate for 10 days, you're 5 times that in a room with someone that you have to like a bit, trying to then get on with getting through that process. So that duration, it's just having that quantity of food every single day. It is phenomenally hard. Everyone was, laughs at the fact that, oh, it's great, you get to eat what you like. 10,000 calories, when you actually lay out that as food on a table, it's a vast quantity. It's why gaining muscle mass for most people is so difficult, is to eat the food you need to consume to get to that point. It's tough. For you to lay down enough body fat to go into that race, to have enough fuel reserves there, that too is incredibly difficult. It's actually really hard in a short space of time to gain that sort of mass on when you need to. And then burning it away, yes, you're burning off fat, but you are stripping away the muscle mass. So your point's right over going into it not being super ripped, conditioned, and ready. Possibly, I'm sure James was spitting. I bet he was thinking, no, to get to the line, like an Olympic athlete, ripped, ready to go and take it all on.
Yeah, and that difference of opinion was tough. We had two very different goals. I was there to complete. James was there to compete, and that has been an enduring part of our kind of friendship. Really, we've done a number of other challenges, and that's never really changed. But actually, what we realised is that having those two different goals actually pulls James back a little bit and pulls me up a little bit. So actually, it can work quite well to two very different personality and goal traits.
At what point did you think within this 49 days that you're not going to get there? What's the darkest point? I know it capsized as well at some point.
Every day, Matt. Every day I thought we're not going to make it. That something would every day something would break. The water desalinator that converts salt water into fresh water broke. The wheels on the seat broke. The oars broke. The oar locks broke. And remember, there's no one you can call in to help you with all of those. Going back to technology, so you have to fix it yourself. And if you can't fix it, that's it. You're done. And again, the reality of giving up on the middle of the Atlantic Ocean is obvious. I don't need to highlight the complexity. If you decide to give up, well, what do? You just sit there and wait for someone to come and collect you. That could take weeks and weeks and weeks. So actually, the mental strain of the whole thing is pretty tough out there.
Yeah, it's an amazing achievement. It's something which is spectacular. I know you guys. You won, right? I mean, let's face the fact that you won. And there was a thing at the end where there was an overweight on the water or something. Who cares? You guys won the race.
Yeah. After we capsized, we had to use our emergency water that was the ballast of the boat, and a technicality of the race meant that we lost a race position. So although we came in first by 2 days, we forfeited that position. But it comes back to numbers, Matt. It didn't really bother me because we did it. We crossed the line, and for me, it was a life-changing moment.
Well, again, that's my next question. Was having not been competitive to that point, having done things which were just there for the challenge, which is great, and get there. And with this one, you got there, but you won. Did that spark a competitive edge to say, all right, what else can we do? Or is it a case of it was more, we did it and it was great to win it and then move on?
I think it was just the completing it that for me was the life-changing thing. I really didn't think I'd be able to. And I had teamed up with one of the great Olympians who was very complimentary about me. That was, that helped my kind of me mentally. And I kind of wanted more.
Would you do it again, the row?
Yes and no. No, because I've done it. I don't really believe in going back over things. But yes, because I think if I did it again, I'd find it twice as easy. And I really found it hard. It really was one of the hardest things I've ever done.
I can see how Marathon de Sables, you could say, I'll go and do it again. I get that because it's a shorter thing to do. This is just such a long time, such a huge input.
I'm so glad I did it, but there's so many other things I'd like to do.
Of course, exactly. That's right. There are a wealth of things out there to try and move on to. Speaking of which, you then did the South Pole. So not had enough of cracknel in the water. I decided to go and have some cracknel on the ice as well. So talk me through, there was 3 of you did this, weren't there? So you had a doctor join you as well as part of the trek and expedition. And this was over what duration?
Dr. Ed Coates became our 3rd team member. And this was, the distance was about 750 kilometers. And we were out there on the ice for about 6 or 7 weeks. Part of that was acclimatization. Part of that was just waiting to get off the ice. So the actual race itself, I think, was about 3 weeks or so. I forget the exact amount of time that we were on our skis physically racing. This was a race. There were teams from all over the world, quite a few Scandinavian teams. So there was some tough competition again. But what appealed to us was that although it is a physical challenge, the South Pole was going to be much more than that. You know, the cold, the risk of hypothermia, frostbite, all of those things. It becomes a race of management, looking after yourself, and boredom. Because, you know, we were skiing for
Absolutely.
16 hours a day. So anyone that,
Wow.
you know, has been cross-country skiing, will know how physically demanding that is, pulling a sledge weighing 60, 70 kilos behind us. But also 16 hours a day. It sounds easy, but oh my goodness, I've never been. I mean, I was falling asleep while skiing, and you're in your own little world. You're wearing a hood that creates a microclimate around your face, and it's unbelievably lonely. It's the only way to describe it. It's just very, very lonely.
So I guess, look, the experience of going across the ocean in a boat, and the duration of the days within that. Actually, go back to the boat again quickly. On the sleep side, how long do you sleep for each night when you're in the boat?
We never slept for more than about 40 minutes at a time. We averaged about 3 hours sleep per 24 hours on the boat. In Antarctica, It was about the same, because although we were skiing for 16 hours, that would kind of insinuate that we had 8 hours off. But those 8 hours, setting up camp, stripping camp, melting snow and ice for water, all those things took a huge amount of time.
So normally, the thing is, within a sleep pattern, it's, again, we can survive for a period of time with some reduction in sleeping hours and deep sleep hours. But after a certain period of time, after a number of days and weeks, it becomes really quite significant in terms of how it affects you psychologically. Your hormone balance changes, your whole approach to mood changes quite significantly. So after, in the boat, 5, 6, 7 weeks into there, once you're in the South Pole and the Antarctic there, having 5 weeks, 6 weeks there of the same thing, that's really tough. When you're exhausted by week 3, we need to have normally, in a sleep cycle per night, about 3 deep sleep cycles, normally around roughly 2 hours of that super deep restorative sleep to make the body recover and cope with the next day and keep on going with it. So how are you in terms of being able to mentally focus and be on it when you're 2 weeks into not sleeping? Do you find you're getting delirium?
You do. Yeah. I mean, the sleep deprivation is probably one of the worst things on all of those challenges. And you start going crazy. Sleep delirium would be the best way to describe it. You become your emotions become heightened. You become more irrational, irritable. You become more emotional generally. And on all of these challenges, that's part of the battle to overcome that, because it's very easy to be overwhelmed by all of those sentiments.
Did you do any blood testing before or after these events?
Funny enough, the South Pole race, we were working with a company called Kinetic. They've got a lot of cold weather chambers, and they do a lot of testing on military. So they actually did a lot of testing on us before and after. We did all our VO2 max tests, and we approached that in a much more scientific manner. Don't ask me stats. I don't have those right now.
I'd be fascinated to look at things like your hormone change over time, because I mean, that sort of intensity.
They did quite a lot of study on that, and I think it was quite interesting, all the data that they were able to get from us. And I thought, especially having a doctor with us, it was quite an interesting, it was an interesting kind of insight into expedition life.
Yeah, absolutely, entirely. And this one, again, it's a race. I mean, it's again a race across to get through this. You've got, again, a competitive person, and Ed, I think, is a doctor. He has a kind of background being competitive as well in the Olympics, I believe. So you've got 2 strong competitors next to you who are kind of driving forwards. And you're there again to get through, achieve, accomplish, and enjoy the experience and go on with that.
Yeah, which is what we did. And actually, the South Pole was a much more enjoyable experience, because everyone kind of got what they wanted out of it. We pushed ourselves really hard. But for me, I was back in a kind of doing something that I felt quite comfortable with, my legs, basically. Again, big thighs.
Playing to your strengths.
Yeah, big thighs, big bum, back to, I can pretty much, a bit like the Duracell bunny, just keep on going. So Actually, I actually felt quite comfortable with it. I started that race having just come out of a couple of weeks of chemotherapy for a flesh-eating bug that I'd picked up while on an expedition in South America. So I wasn't actually in peak physical condition when I started it. And if anything, I used that race to rebuild my physicality. And it meant that actually I had a very different mindset from the beginning. James, I think, approached it, much more like an Olympic sprint. And actually he fell pretty ill during the race, whereas I actually strengthened. So strangely, from a physical point of view, I think I fared better than James, the Olympian, despite going into it as the weaker of the two.
Well, I think the key thing is that sports people often are very good at the thing that they do, and they can stretch that a small margin either way. But going into an extreme environment for extreme durations, athletes actually are quite finely tuned and don't always cope very well with that degree of change. So, and also I think he got pneumonia. You can get unlucky with those things. You can just catch the wrong timing, the wrong moment, and then you really suffer through a long, long event. He did very well. Clearly, he's strong enough to have got through that and got to the end of it. But I think it shows for both of you, for you across all these things, is there's again this show of resilience where you built this point of, come what may, I'm going to keep on going, push to the end to achieve this thing for my own reasons and need. And it's the same theme again and again across these three events that you've done. It's all about being strong and resilient. I think you mentioned before as well, the whole the woke terminology, the woke environment that we're in. Do you think there's too much leeway given to people who are using mental fragility as an excuse? Are we going too far down that line? Are we allowing people to get away with not performing? I think Simone Biles springs to mind, pulling out from the US team in the Olympics, doing gymnastics, and she needs space to recover mentally. And personally, my viewpoint was she's letting someone else not get a spot. Someone else who's trained really hard could have taken that spot instead. So you have a duty to actually get there with a team and perform. What do you think?
God, it's so controversial, Matt. It's a hard one. I have strong opinions on it. I think sport fundamentally is about being the best at what you do. And the only way to be the best at what you do, whatever that is, whether it is sport, art, music, science, is about putting in hard work and pushing yourself further and harder than you believe is possible, and surrounding yourself with brilliance and excellence. And I think we're in danger of conceding to the first stumbling block when it comes to anything. And I think once sport falls down that slope, and I don't want to go into detail, but the Olympic rowers, I don't think the men's team behaved particularly well this season, blaming others. I look at someone like Helen Glover and how she came back, motherhood, having just had twins, so inspirational, so humble, so proud to be there. It didn't matter that she didn't get a medal. She got a medal in my mind because she is awesome and represents everything that sport is about. And she was very humble with it. Now, this idea of blaming others because you haven't done well, it just doesn't cut for me. And then there's obviously the other thing, the mental health side of things, and we've seen it in tennis and we've seen it in gymnastics. I think that's a much more. You need to think about that a little bit more, and the pressures on youngsters and the pressures of the press. Listen, there's a lot that comes with it, but there's a lot at stake. There's your worldwide reputation. You don't win at a sport just because you deserve it. You win because you put in all the hard work and you're willing to brave and confront all the things that come with it. And in return, you get adulation, and you get all of the financial things that will come your way. So look at tennis and Emma. She has a huge amount of pressure under her now, and I would hope that she will be magnanimous in defeat, and I would hope that the press will also give her give her not an easy ride, but will kind of be just a little bit gentler, perhaps, than they can be with people. So I think it's finding a middle ground. It's a very that's probably a politician's answer, but that's kind of where I am. But I also firmly believe that the Jürgen Grobler school of teaching has shown what it does. I don't think you can question that.
Yeah, there's no doubt at all that allowing no leeway, going hard line, it produces results. There always is a danger of people who are more or less able to cope with the intensity in quite the same way, the mental intensity in quite the same way. There's a downside, and I think that's always been there. It will always be there. We're now better at picking up on people who need the support and the assistance, but there's a danger of allowing people to get away with letting themselves slip too easily too soon. And the grey area is, where are you in that spectrum? What's going to happen within that? Emma Raducanu is really interesting, actually. My son Ben, who's now a footballer, but was a tennis player some years ago at a high level, and he was a hitting partner with Emma for a number of years in the same club down in Bromley in southeast London. And you could see at that point in time, she's always been a special talent. She's always been very much out there, winning competitions, doing phenomenally well as a poster girl at 14 years old, and was great. And to see her do well was great, brilliant. What I liked about the fact that how she won was she was carefree. She got to the US Open, she looked carefree. She just turned up, she smiled, she enjoyed it, and that's why she won. She was there, be able to just play her tennis, do her thing, and relax and enjoy it. I hope, but the danger of forwards course is the pressure, as you said, it does grow. For all sports people, it does grow. For Simone Biles, the pressure grew, and it's hard to then get past the commercial deals that come with all of that, and people around you who surround you with opportunities that then eat your time and distract you. So I really hope, I have no idea, I really hope that Emma's got good people around her that can just keep her there. I know her parents are very, very good. I've met them through the training process, and they are very balanced and they are very stable. I think she's got a good, better grounding there, but that's not always the way. And it's very tough to kind of weave your way through that circuit as a sports person to be able to be on it the entire time. It's very tough, really is. Once you did the South Pole and finished that off, going across ice in one direction is not enough. So you got to go vertical on the ice instead and go up Everest in 2018 with another sporting person, with Victoria Pendleton along the way. So she's spoken about her own mental battles in terms of coping with pressures on tour, and she's a phenomenal athlete. And different experience for you to be with her, to be with James in that setting. What was the main inspiration for doing Everest in the first place? What was the part about it that was tougher than you thought it would be? I think we look at it again, we think, well, it's been done 1,000 times more than, so therefore it can't be that hard. What was the toughest part? And having got to the summit, actually achieved the whole thing, would you say that it was as awe-inspiring as you assume it should be?
Everest had been something I'd been fascinated in ever since I was a little boy. So I'd read all the books and had dreamed about maybe climbing it. But you probably won't be surprised to hear that the boy that didn't do any sport never believed that I was capable of any of that. So I think when I was 45 or so, this is a couple of years ago now, I'd become a father, and I realized I was slipping into being the dad that did those things, not the dad who does those things. And I really wanted to still be that person that embraces risk and challenge and physicality and tests my mental fortitude as a father. So Everest it kind of seemed like the right time. And then Victoria, we met serendipitously. We met out at a party, and I just really liked her from the beginning. I liked her character. I liked her individuality, and we got chatting about climbing mountains. And for me, I'd wanted to climb a big mountain, and for me, there is something so symbolic about Everest. The fact it's the highest mountain in the world, steeped in controversiality. Many people think it's wrong. That there are many. It's a loaded mountain in many different ways. But the opportunity came along. I teamed up with my friend Kenton Cool, and I felt that it was just the right time, the right team, and the right time in my life, just before my children before it became a scary mountain for them. They were in their, they were kind of 6 and 7. It was still an exciting mountain in their minds, rather than one that kills lots of people. Or that's the wrong term. Not a mountain that many people have lost their lives on. The mountain doesn't kill people.
Sure.
I need to be careful with how I describe that. And it just felt like the right opportunity, and it was amazing. It was. I mean, I don't want to use the superlative too many times, but it really was. It was better than I thought it was going to be.
Wow, really.
Everything about it was monumental and beautiful and terrifying and just magical. During lockdown, I think we probably all thought about a place. That's where I went to. I went up onto the side of Everest in those long, dark winter months, like we're embarking on again now. And I would just imagine being on the slopes under candlelight. It's one of the reasons I like this kind of lifestyle. Still now, by candlelight, I would just imagine being there again. And I loved it. It was tough. It wasn't as tough as rowing the Atlantic, but it was tough in other ways.
It's a very different physical challenge, isn't it? Because you're not into this thing of having had that same level of intensity. You're trying to, run the Marathon de Sables or go across the ocean where you have a set distance to try and cover off as much as you can. It's less of a challenge in terms of that metric. It's a far more, I would guess, more psychological challenge. Okay, you've got to be physically ready for it as well, but it's more psychological, getting through each point, each part of each day, each part of each week, and making that all come together.
Yeah, it's not. Listen, you need to be in really good physical health, and there's a part of the conflict or the controversy of the mountain is that it does attract people that shouldn't be there. I definitely saw people that weren't physically ready, so you have to be in good physical form, but it's not a prerequisite for climbing. For me, it was a battle of mind over matter. It's a scary place. There's a lot of variables that are out of your control. And you only need to watch The Alpinist or 14 Peaks, some great films that are on that are on video on demand streaming sites right now, and you'll see the very real dangers that come with a lot of these very big peaks, big seracs that can just give way. And for me, that was pretty hard as a father. The justification, is it worth doing this as a father?
That's interesting.
And I'm still conflicted, to be honest. It all worked out well for me. I climbed it. I came back. I was able to do a live link to my children's classroom from the summit of Mount Everest. It was everything I wanted from it, which is why I think it remains such a magical one for me. But Matt, I was lucky, and I'm aware of that. A lot of climbing is luck. Now, you can be someone like Nims, because I'm sure lots of people have watched his 14 Peaks. If they haven't, please go and watch it. It's absolutely brilliant. You could be someone like Nims, who is truly astonishing when it comes to mountains and makes it look completely effortless. But for people like me, relative novices, and people who aren't naturally adept at mountains, it is a dangerous peak, and one that kind of felt like the culmination of proving to myself that I do have it, as much as that little boy felt that I didn't. I think it was the final nail to prove to myself that if you suddenly said to me now, Ben, do you fancy coming for a run tomorrow? I'd go, okay. And I'd just be honest with you. I'd say, Matt, I might not keep up with you, but I wouldn't have that inner doubt that I've had all my life. And in the same way, if Nims said to me, do you fancy going up Scarfell Pike at the weekend? I'd go, yeah, sure. Why not? And if Foster asked me to go for a swim in the Thames, I'd go, yeah, I think I can do that. And if Pendleton said, do you fancy coming for a cycle? And that is what it all comes down to, Matt. It's just having the confidence to have a go at it.
Yeah, there are ways in which you can really just overcome adversity, enjoy the moment, and be ready for taking on challenges as and when they come along, no matter how big and how small. And that mental resilience and toughness is one thing that I think we need to keep on reinforcing to people all the time, is that it's not the question of the metrics, not the question of the speed or the actual overall achievement that you measure as a time, as you started off with. It's very much a case of you do it for that sense of real personal satisfaction and the way in which you can grow both physically and mentally at the same time. Ben, you've been a tremendous guest. Thank you so much for all of your stories about what you've done. Great to hear the ins and outs of it all. Quickly, what's next? Do you know yet?
what's next. There'll be something, Matt. You know what? Let's get through these winter months. I'm going to literally be by candlelight for the next few. I'm writing a book, which is why I'm down here, kind of off grid, just trying to get in the zone. But my advice to everyone is just do what I do. Get out, try and do some fitness, get as close to nature as much as you can. I think we have a couple of really tough months ahead of us, unfortunately, and I think keeping on top of your physical and mental welfare is so important right now. So I'm just going to kind of get through the next few months with my family, and then just be excited by 2022 and what comes. There'll be many more adventures, Matt. We'll be back on for another. You can have another monologue from me of the next things I've done.
Sounds great. Good, Ben. Thank you so much, and see you again very soon.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.